Hi, this is Lou, and I want to talk about how, at least at tactical levels, realism in war games often isn't much fun. There's a grim reality in war, which is not at all like a game, and we've talked about that before. Rule dominance, which is what you have in games, is fighting against the terrible chaos of war. In the real military, organization, which is to say regimentation, uniforms, and so on, discipline, is used to try to make sense of chaos. But gamers don't like regimentation. What's wrong with realism? Realism requires additional constraints. Modern players don't like constraints. So World of Tanks stops with the armor and the guns and such, and they let tanks survive lots of hits. They let the tanks repair their tracks in a few seconds, which is ludicrous, and they let them freelance. There's no organization, no platoons. Everybody goes helter-skelter. The same is true with World of Warships, which has next to nothing to do with real naval warfare. War Thunder, on the other hand, at least has three modes: arcade, realistic, and simulation. And the simulation is a pretty good simulation, but it's not a whole lot of fun for most people. It's not much fun at all for most people. So we have order versus chaos. Contrast World of Tanks or World of Warships with real regimented warfare. Real warfare has to be regimented to try to impose some order on chaos. Otherwise, all you've got is a mob. In games like World of Tanks and World of Warships, chaos reigns. You do have a mob. But they've reduced the chaos in subtle ways, such as there are no night battles to speak of, and there's lots of extra information available that you would not have in the real world. Or consider battles in Total War, Rome, and so forth, lots of different versions, where the fighting to the death is common, fighting with enormous casualties on both sides. That's not the way it happened in the real world, but that's the way it happens in the game. Now, a lot of this is probably generational. No one likes constraints, but old-time gamers were used to them, and they learned to work within them much better than modern gamers who quit and play something easier. It's a generational difference, a matter of what you're used to and what everyone expects from you. So realistic games, that is, games with actual constraints rather than merely the appearance of realism, are out of fashion. And the difference is the appearance of realism versus actual realism, because actual realism involves constraints. Let's take an example which I've talked about in another screencast: realism in air warfare. Dogfights are romantic, but they're not realistic, not if you want to live, unless you happen to have the better planes and can sucker the other side into dogfighting. In the World Wars, the idea was to never be seen by the guy you shot down. Zoom and boom, or boom and zoom, was the ideal. Get superior altitude, put yourself between the enemy and the sun, dive on them, zoom by with a superior speed from the dive, shoot when you get close, and keep going. Don't dogfight. Instead, use your speed to regain altitude. Doesn't sound like much fun as a game, does it? So you have to decide what to emphasize, the romantic or the realistic. Fortunately, strategic level games encourage focus on the latter, not the former, because the romance tends to be with individuals, and you don't see individuals in strategic level games. Thanks for listening.